Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can find us on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Um, Today we're going to do a real fun test with knives and chopsticks. The other day we were chatting on my friend Ed Fowler's forum, Knife Talk Online. KnifeTalkOnline.com. Anyway, we were one of the fellows posted up a question, or he posted up a video of another fella that had bought what I'd call a semi-custom knife, and he was pretty upset with the performance that he got with the knife cutting chopsticks. Now, apparently, he contacted the manufacturer, and the manufacturer had posted a reply video where he said that cutting chopsticks was abusive, and you shouldn't do that with a knife. Well, I don't work with a whole lot of bamboo. I mean, I do know how to use chopsticks, but I'd much rather use a fork. Anyways, so I got to thinking about it, and I thought, well, heck, I mean, it's just an overgrown toothpick, really. I mean, is bamboo really that tough or hard that, cutting an overgrown toothpick would be considered abuse to a knife? So, went ahead, and as soon as I read that, I thought, it's been a while since we went to our favorite Chinese restaurant, so grabbed my wife and boy, and away we went, all in the name of science, of course. Grab some chopsticks. I've got two different kinds here. One of them just says bamboo chopstick on it, and it's the round one. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of different makers of these. The other one, I really don't know what it says. I don't read Chinese or anything but English, really. But it does say made in China, so apparently it's an authentic Chinese chopstick. Anyway, so I grabbed the chopsticks and pulled out a whole bunch of different knives. I do have three production knives and a whole bunch of knives that I made. I wrote down some measurements on them to try to see. The fellow with the video said that the knife that he got was ground paper thin. Now, I don't know if he just said paper thin as in it looked like paper thin, or if he actually got out a mic and measured it, but I'll tell you some measurements on some paper in relation to the thickness of these edges that I'm playing around with, and that just gives us another reference point. So anyway, so pretty much what I did, I've got these knives right here. I'll show them off to you a little bit. Okay, so I started off with, I got the shop dog messing with the back of my tripod. Well, Ed hadn't seen her in a while. Claire, see, shop dog. Anyway, so we've got a Victorinox Tinker. It doesn't say what kind of steel it's made out of, but at the shoulder of the edge, it's about 20 thousandths thick. We've got a Benchmade 940 Osborne, an S30V. I've used it so much I ended up having to regrind it and thinned it out considerably while I was there. And the shoulder of the edge on that one right now is 17 thousandths. I actually took this one to a full zero, and then when I reground it, and then just over the years of use, it's thickened back up. It's almost time for a regrind now. This one right here is pretty exciting. This is my very first Damascus knife. Made this last week. It's 1095 and 15N20, 64 layers with a twist. I was going to go for more layers, but it was at the end of the day I finally got that one done after I screwed up 3 billets. So like I said, first one, pretty excited about that. But anyway, it is 9 thousandths thick at the shoulder of the edge. This is the first 1095 Carter pattern necker that I'd made. It is 22 thousandths thick at the shoulder of the edge. This one and this one, I carried each one of those for I carried this one for about 6 months and carried this one for about 8 months or so. I'll probably carry this one for a good year just to see what it does. But this is the prototype 440C stainless that I carried for a while, and I sharpened it quite a bit, so it's 20 thousandths thick at the edge. And here is a San Mai 1095 and mild steel necker that I'd made. Of course, I've used it quite a bit, so it's not showing up in the camera, but there's a nice little wavy line down there where the mild steel ends and the 1095 starts. It's at 13 thousandths at the shoulder of the edge. Then we've got some kitchen knives, 2 stainless ones that I made, 3 1095 shop testers, and then a Chicago cutlery paring knife. It's stainless, but I'm not sure what kind of steel it's made out of. So anyway, so I did two separate ways of cutting the chopsticks. What I did to start with was I took the knife, make sure you're still on camera, yep. Took the knife and then just did straight through cuts. Now, you know, they're mostly push cuts and I don't push cut a whole lot, but anyway, so a straight through push cut at 9 thousandths thick, and there was nothing. There's no chipping, no rolling, no deflection, nothing happened to it. So then what I decided to do was I started to get a little bit rougher with it. So instead of just doing a push cut straight through it, I push cut about halfway through it and then twisted that edge out. And you can see on this one, at S30V, there's no chipping, no rolling, no nothing. So even the Victorinox Tinker, which I've always felt that these blades were quite a bit softer than what they needed to be, even it at 20 thousandths thick at the shoulder, which the shoulder on this one, you can kind of see I've laid back quite a ways to get it to cut a little bit better. It showed no damage at all. Even the Chicago cutlery knife at 14 thousandths thick at the shoulder of the edge. Now there's not a whole lot to hold on to with this knife, but see, it's buried about halfway in there. Now twisting it out, and there's still nothing. No bending, no chipping, no rolling, no nothing. And that is burying that knife in there and then twisting the edge out like that is pretty close to the brass rod test that you do on the 1/4 inch piece of brass rod that's inlaid into the block of wood. Burying it in there and then twisting it out on that chopstick is really close to the edge deformation test that I do with this brass rod, which is where you lay the blade, you know, at the sharpening angle, you press down on it to see the edge deflect, and then you keep pressing down and then raising the spine of the edge up, or the spine of the blade up, until you cause that edge to fail. Then note how it failed, and then decide if that's the way you want the blade to, or the edge to fail or not. So this chopstick test is really close to that. So far we have got no damage. I mean, I did that, you know, those 2 cuts on all of these knives right here, all of these ones, and didn't get any sort of damage whatsoever. So then I thought, okay, so the guy said the edge on his knife was ground paper thin. So I went and grabbed some measurements of some paper. So we've got copy paper here. I'm pretty sure copy paper comes in all different weights, but this is 4 thousandths of an inch thick. This post-it note, it's a thin one. Most of these yellow post-it notes mic out at 5 thousandths thick, but this one's 4 thousandths thick. And then you know, your local classified ad newspaper is 3,000 7-inch thick. So I went through my junk drawer here and into my kitchen, and I found a couple of shop testers. That one's also a shop tester, although I suppose I could throw that in the kitchen for a long-term tester. Then I pulled out two of the kitchen knives I've been playing with an awful lot lately. These are my 440C stainless. That's a 7-inch chef with a hickory handle, and a small pair with a hickory handle also. The small pair is at 10 thousandths thick, and because a lot of times my boy grabs a hold of these and he's kind of rough on them. And the chef is 6,000 7-inch thick at the shoulder. Now I started doing the same tests with these blades, and that's where we started seeing some damage. So I took this chef's knife. Well, no, let's go with the let's go thicker and go down to thinner. So this one's at 10,000 7-inch thick, 440C stainless. Let's find a hard spot on the bench there. Buried it in there, twisted it out, nothing. Now I'm not going to do it again, but this one at 6 thousandths thick at the shoulder of the edge, as long as I went straight through the chopstick and with no twisting force, it went clean through the chopstick with no damage. Now the second I buried the edge halfway into the chopstick and then twisted it out, then I got a chip. There was no rolling and no denting, just a nice clean chip there. But like I said, that's 6 thousandths of an inch thick at the shoulder of the edge. That's a pretty thin knife to be, you know, standing up to a twisting force like that. You know, when you start getting below 10 thousandths of an inch thick at the shoulder of the edge, pretty much that relegates that blade to, you know, much lighter tasks. And while I wouldn't call cutting chopsticks you know, abuse or anything, burying an edge in there and then twisting it out, that part is a little bit rougher on the knife. Now this one here is at 7 thousandths of an inch thick. These two knives have got a whole bunch of chips out of them from me doing crazy stuff like, you know, seeing how thin you can take an edge and then try to cut through a nail and see, you know, what happens. So anyway, 7 thousandths of an inch thick, this is what starts happening. First of all, they usually start cutting through the chopstick a little bit easier. And then second of all, okay, see, we're about halfway through that chopstick. There goes a chip. Which is what, you know, I mean, for the way I make these kitchen knives, that's about what I'd expect and about what I'm after also. But you can pull that chip out of there and take a look inside. It's got nice fine grain, you know, looks good and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I guess that's about it for the cutting test. Pretty much, I don't really consider cutting chopsticks. Well, you can take that same, I think this was this same knife here, and whittle on the thing all day long. Oh, I hit part of the steel that was in that last one. But anyway, you can whittle on that chopstick all day long. You know, I don't see that as being really all that tough on a knife. It's just when you bury it in there and then twist it out is where the damage is coming from. Now, back to the guy that had the knife that he was getting microchipping at the edge, and then he was getting rolling up into the primary, which I have seen that before. I haven't done, you know, any really good tests, to be able to show you exactly what happens there. But a lot of times that does come from, I guess the term for it now is power grinding. When you, usually it happens with dull belts or the wrong grit of belt. So, a lot of us knife makers sharpen knives on a belt grinder. And there's a couple of tricks to that. First of all, you have to use a very, very light touch. Then I generally use a fairly coarse belt because I'm not really sharp. I'm not trying to get the knife sharp on the belt. I'm just trying to get the shaping done on the belt. That saves wear and tear on my stones and everything like that. So, and then also usually sharpen with the belt going away from the edge, not the belt going into the edge. Those will help out quite a bit. But the big thing with the power grinding isn't so much the doing the work on the grinder, it's the heat transfer. Okay, you take a 1/4-inch piece of steel and put that up against the belt grinder and start hogging away on it. There's a certain amount of time that it takes for the rest of that bar of steel to get hot, other than just the part that's contacting the belt. So it is possible, let's say you were grinding this one right here. It is very possible to be holding onto this knife, grinding the edge, and have your thumb right there, grind this part right here, and your thumb will feel no heat, but that edge has gotten too hot. Because the edge is thinner material, it heats up an awful lot faster. And by the time the heat from the edge transfers all the way up to the thicker portion of the blade where your thumb is, by the time that thumb starts getting too hot, your edge has gotten way too hot. Now, like I said, I haven't done any, any empirical type tests, to prove that one way or another, but it is something that I have noticed. Anyway, so yeah, I guess to sum it all up, cutting chopsticks, so far as I can tell, they are just overgrown toothpicks. There's, as long as you cut into them properly, I don't think that you'll have any problems with edge damage unless you are cutting with a specialty knife. Like a chef's knife ground to 6/1000 thick at the edge. I mean, this is a very high performance kitchen knife. You wouldn't use a knife like this with this thin of a grind to cut up whole chickens or chop up crab legs or cut through frozen meats, things like that. When you get down this thin, it's mostly just for thawed out stuff. No bones, fruits, vegetables, meats, things like that. But they will go through whatever it is you're cutting with very, very light force. And they're just a pleasure to use. But that knife is not the type of knife that you would normally chop chopsticks with. But anyways, most normal type knives with the edge over, 10/1000 of an inch thick or so at the shoulder of the edge, I really don't see where that's a problem cutting chopsticks, and I certainly wouldn't call it abuse, I'd just call it use. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.